What is it to step together into the global footprint of God? Tonight, WordWalk wants to present what it means for a group of volunteers to get together and to do those things that change the world. You know, the greatest physical entity that there is in this world today is made up of volunteers. It's the United States military. However, the greatest entity of volunteers to change the scene for the glory of God is the church. So tonight we want to talk about how God has crafted you with your talents, your gifts, your abilities, your callings to be able to do that. And WordWalk can help come alongside and help you in recognizing and making the connections to be able to do so. In doing this, we've asked Susan Rollwagon to present what this looks like. She's into staff development, team alignment, and has used her gifts and abilities around the world in various ways to accomplish this task. Susan.
Thank you, Mike. I do want to say before we get started that we don't assume that you're not already using your abilities where you can. We do assume that you are part of a local body and a church and are reaching now to make a difference in God's ministry. So before you ask, why are we talking about this tonight if you're already doing it, I want to invite you to pause the video and print the handout if you'd like to follow along or make sure I stay on track or take some notes. At the very top of the handout, we pose the question, have you ever explored how the things you're good at doing fit into God's global kingdom? There are a couple of reasons why we ask that question. One is there is no Christian certification that you receive after a certain point of your Christian maturity so that you can engage in the kingdom. We know we are to be doing it all the time, and yet sometimes we wait around to be invited. In all of our Christian communities, there are needs, and those needs are listed, and people are, they ask for volunteers, and we use different filters to step up and meet those needs and engage and volunteer. When we can align our volunteering to what we enjoy doing or are good at doing or can help other people do, it makes it even more special. It makes it more enriching. Another thing that makes it more enriching that we do all the time and I want to recognize is simply listening to and following the prompting of the Spirit. When we are going along our everyday lives, if you're a growing believer, you know that time when the Spirit prompts you to do something and you obey, and there is a richness, a satisfaction, a growth after that layers on faith to be willing to do it again. That's different than when you did it be out of guilt or because it was on your list or for whatever other reason that you have. But just as we know that to hear that prompting of the Spirit, we need to have pure lives and be in His Word. So to align our actions that are needed to what we will enjoy, we have to kind of reflect on ourselves a little bit. So we're going to start right at the top with what about you? Thinking about your gifts, your talents, your skills and knowledge. Kind of moving us from our own agendas to accomplishing obedience that's aligned with God's plan, and not just in our own lives, but also coordinated with other people. So to start that, I want to ask a few questions. First of all, think about those extra things you make time to do at least every couple of months because you find some pleasure in it. It's not that you have to. It may not be specifically even for someone else. It may involve someone else, but it's fulfilling. It's not building walls between you and anyone. It's not building walls between you and God. Think of a couple of those things. Even jot down a couple. It could be a hobby. It could be a place you go. It could be anything. Just you try to prioritize that for yourself every couple of months because of the pleasure you find. Another question I want you to think about is your most satisfying job or project you have engaged in. I'm going to ask you to pause the video if nothing comes to mind right away. I hope you've thought of at least a couple, and one way to expand on that that's very important for all of us is to think, if I had 4 or 5 really satisfying jobs or parts of those jobs, what do they have in common? Or what part of those projects was the zinger, was the really exciting part that I liked? What I want you to do is think about those driving satisfiers for you. And when you do something practical, something that you have to do in life, what are those things that really satisfy you? For me, I really need to be creating in some way in the job or project that I'm doing. Something novel, something new. That makes me excited. I also really get satisfaction from equipping people, making sure that they are learning something or can reproduce something, but we're different. Everybody's different. Some people really love working with a bunch of people. Other people love producing alone. Some people like collaboration. Some people like to be recognized for what they have done. Just lots of different things drive us. But it's important for us to reflect on what are those things that we really enjoy and get satisfaction from. I hope you've thought of a couple of examples of that. And you know what? We wouldn't even mind if you texted us and said, hey, you need to know that I really like doing this. You could also text us and tell us what you're really good at. Make note of the things that you feel you do effectively. Maybe people have told you, oh, you're really good at this. Maybe you've gotten awards for something. You know, here's another way sometimes you can tell if you are effective at something. Many times in our lives, we will be the one in the room that has an idea about something specific. And later in our lives, it has happened often enough that we realize, I thought everybody thought of this. But apparently, I'm one of the few people that really think this way. And all of a sudden, you realize God has given you a gift that's unique from those other people. Now, whether you think about this last part on the slide about what you do effectively or about what satisfies you or anything, can you think of things that you enjoy or would enjoy showing or teaching or sharing with others? I think that's an aspect of what we kind of need to look at ourselves wholly about. This kind of reflection can help you kind of get a picture, a mirror of when will I be able to engage my energy effectively and not run out of energy so fast, because all of us use more energy to do things that we don't understand or don't enjoy or can't do effectively than when we can. So use these questions to kind of dig down and look at you. The next thing I want to talk about are transferable skills. Transferable skills are a term that we use when we move from job to job. In one job, we learned a skill, and in our next job, we may use that very same skill, but we use it in a different way. In my life, I didn't go into really the corporate business world until I was in my 30s. And I pulled from a lot of skills that I had learned earlier, even as a child sometimes, into that my business world. I found that in organization development, where you really need to understand the systemic nature of businesses, where if you do one thing with one team, it affects another group, and you really need to be able to follow that string. But that skill for me really it developed out of working the summers for my father, who was a builder. Working in construction helped me understand this I'd better not undo because it might impact something else in this building. And so understanding that everything is connected has really helped my career. It's a skill. I also learned a lot of skills during producing theater and drama direction that transferred perfectly into project management. So the opposite happens too. We learn a lot of things at work that we then go and help individuals with. I learned how to do this at work. Oh, I can help people do this in their lives. And so that transferable skill bucket is something we forget sometimes to look at when we're thinking about ministering. So you do this today. You are already helping people in your real life. So think about, how are you already using skills and experiences that you have and transferring those to being able to help other individuals. Just people you know, family, people you like. Here are a few of the things that we thought of. This is another thing you could share with us, and I want to give you a bit of a context about all of this by sharing a bit about WordWalk. We've been doing this for about 12 years, and our heart purpose originally was to expand the participation in what God is doing globally by giving U.S. believers that we saw every day, those opportunities to be impacted by ministries in less generic mission trip type opportunities, and more in the ways that we have been blessed by participating. It was kind of like wanting people, in the 80s we called it expanding our God size, wanting people to have the opportunity to expand their perception of what God was doing around the world. And the reason we were so pulled to this were several things that we saw about missions. One of them Mike called recently when we first started working on this session was Christian voyeurism. What we saw was people loved it when missionaries would come in to their churches and tell about what was going on, but they looked at it through almost a reality show lens. It was like the weird stories were neat, and all the unusual new things that they had never known about. But they didn't do anything afterward. Now, they gave. We assume they continued to give, because every ministry must have gifts, and that's good. In fact, we really had no temperature gauge on that. But we didn't see places for them to be able to actually do something so that they remembered it after they left the pew. The other thing we saw were efforts to dilute missions down to kind of just humanitarian aid, or to divert missions toward social justice agendas. And I think it just kind of muddied the meaning of missions in a lot of ways. Now, it's been a decade, or a little over a decade, since we started this, and I think growing believers have a real distinction. We definitely do humanitarian aid in places where it's reasonable, and sometimes there are social justices that we have to really be very aware of. But the kingdom of God it cannot become blurred. And that was a concern for us, even though I think there's been some movement on that front. Another thing that really concerned us was in Christendom, it seemed to be filled with marketed professionals in competition almost. They were using statistics and entertainment to get attention. And the most drastic, tragic tragedy of this was that a lot of Christians were seeing these things and felt too intimidated to get involved. Past the plate and past the pew. They were interested, but they were not. We used to call it at the beginning, or I used to call it at the beginning, we were doing this to help people get their hands dirty. We wanted them to engage. Mike and I had full-time ministry experience in church startups, in big youth programs, in Christian schools, but we were really nobodies. When Mike was looking at my notes, he said, "We're not nobodies." But I said, "Well, we've never been on a shelf in a Christian bookstore or been connected to a media machine or published our strategic growth plans, dear. We're kind of nobodies." But realizing that, God began to expose us to some really uniquely effective mission ministries that were kind of run by nobodies. They were people that were having to lean on God to survive, or they were people that didn't really have the success standards that made the perfect missionary, but they were inspiring individuals. Or they were people that you kind of looked at, that guy is a character. But God was using that character, obviously, by the results that God was giving. So they were not your picture-perfect situations, but they were definitely opportunities for us to learn and grow and give. And because we got such a blessing out of it, we wanted to try to expose growing believers to opportunities where they could engage in the ways they were already equipped to help. I mean, who has time to go to how-to lessons on how to go to the mission field and really be effective? Now, WordWalk does equip. We do share and teach those practical things of how to be safe and how to prepare and how to be effective. But we don't want to teach you a new skill. We wanted to be able to help people engage by jumping out of their whirlwind worlds and being able to jump in to what God was doing in his global footprint. So what does this look like? This is what it looked like the other night at our gathering, when people listed the things they do today without even looking outside of their own worlds. What do they offer as help to people? And this is what it looks like in WordWalk. Mike and I brainstormed and tried to list as many as we could, the skills, experiences, talents, giftings that we have seen people tangibly share as we have been in this ministry, until we ran out of room on our chart. But to us, these are the heroes of WordWalk, the people that engage and step up and, of course, support however they can. Giving is definitely a part of this, but going beyond that and engaging gives you so much more of a blessing. God continues to connect us with partners in established ministries outside the United States. People leading small organizations or raising a family far from their extended family, or those working alone in a far from home places. They benefit so much from volunteers just sharing the kind of help and skills they're already equipped to offer. We don't need to be professionals to offer a hand to ministries with minimal resources or that are in survival cultures. In places like these, what we consider insignificant efforts translate into memories of hope and love and into energy to persevere in sharing Christ's love. These WordWalk volunteers are willing to engage, and we are still finding those opportunities. The opportunities come in very different ways. He opens the door, sometimes through simply our willingness to build a relationship. One of the things that in our day and age we should be very aware of is those opportunities to spread our skills and share ourselves through the internet. And we don't. You can see by this, I've listed a lot of the apps that are used internationally for communicating with other people, and all of these other things we can do over the internet. We do have some resources that can help you if you are interested in engaging electronically with some of our ministry partners. Obviously, encouraging a U.S. missionary is so powerful because they are away from home. But ministering through communication with someone who is a national, ministering in their own country, can be tricky sometimes, that relationship and knowing how to communicate with that person so that it's really effective and wise. One of our resources will help you know about these apps that are on the screen and which ones do what and which ones might be more effective at what times. The fourth resource that we have to offer, if you ask, we'll send it to you, send you any of them, is one about if somebody friends you or follows you on social media and they're a stranger, but they are connected to somebody else that is international that you may or may not know terribly well. And there are some precautions that you should realize and follow. But building relationships is definitely one of the ways God opens the door. And we wanted to share an example of one of those that just happened a few days ago, this weekend. This week, two of our WordWalk volunteers are in Kazakhstan, there to encourage a Serbian ministry that we have worked with for about a decade. And they're mostly on vacation, but they're also going to Uzbekistan and Tajikistan while they're there, and to see if there are WordWalk opportunities. But the relationship is the relationship building is about Bob. Bob is the blonde mustached guy, the bald-headed blonde mustached guy that you see in these pictures, and he never knows a stranger. That is his gifting. He makes friends all over, all the time, without any effort. And this weekend, when they were in Almaty, Kazakhstan, because they ride Harley Davidsons, they went to a motorcycle rally. They just saw it and they stopped in. And later that day, they were in another part of town, and all of a sudden, all these motorcycle riders started walking toward them. They didn't know them. They didn't know who this was. And the guys said, "Oh, we saw you on Instagram." So the first guys had Instagrammed, and so the second guys connected. Now, in this picture, you see a fella down just below the writing. He is the writing on the screen. He has sunglasses on his head, and he is looking at something in his hand. The woman in that picture, in the edge of that frame, is a representative from the Serbian mission there in town. So Bob's gifting, talent for making friends has allowed this ministry to begin to connect to another group of people, to more individuals. So sometimes God just opens the door through our building of relationships. Another way God often opens the door is through just impromptu creativity when the team is on the ground. The example we wanted to share with you about this is from several years ago in Jamaica. This pink building is an orphanage there, and it is an orphanage for toddlers and infants. And the team went. This isn't the entire team, but the team went, and that night they were back at the hotel, and they were talking, and they realized there was no shade in the entire fenced area for these toddlers to play in the shade. It was all sunny. I mean, it's in Jamaica, folks. It's hot. So there were 4 volunteer builders on this team, and they began to talk about what could we build to give them a shade. And of course, they went through the normal thing where they thought up ideas, and then they had to restrict it some because of time and because of resources and supplies that were there, and the money, the cost. And then as they were beginning to formulate a decent plan, the designer there began to ask questions like, now, how many hours in the day is the sun going to be able to be shining on that, and are we capitalizing on the shade time, on the shade and the direction of the sun, and if we have these walls, is the breeze going to be able to get through? And then they began to adapt according to that. And so what you're looking at is the structure that came from that creativity, they're just fun stories to tell. I want to share one more example of how sometimes God opens the door for us to provide needs. And that is when leaders of international ministries actually send us a list when they know we are planning to come. And this happened earlier this year when we were planning to come to Bethlehem Evangelical Academy. The academic director there sent us a list, and one of the big things that he wanted was for us to take several sessions during their teacher in-service week and lay the foundation for how teachers could train students in critical thinking. And so in June, we came together and built what we delivered in August in the West Bank. So there were 4 educators. One educator, Lori, stepped up. She created much of the content and presented it to the teachers in Bethlehem. The rest of us supplied examples, did research, gave her feedback. We created follow-up resources so that Jeff can build on what Lori laid the foundation for. And Allie and Michelle, who were not able to travel because they were in the classroom here in Pensacola, they definitely supported us through prayer and electronically during that week. Another need Jeff mentioned was structure for the valuable opportunities they have with volunteers that come to the school when native English-speaking visitors can spend some one-on-one time with students. And he said it just helps students so much to have these conversations and to actually learn from what that's like talking to someone. But the teachers don't know what to assign the visitors, and the visitors don't know how to use the time. So we built resources for that and made them into bookmarks for the volunteers so that they had an idea of what to do, and gave the teachers lists of ideas of how they could spend that time. Another thing we find is that there are things leaders know they need, but they don't have the money or the resources or the time to put some of their wishes into the reality. But we made writing booklets for the lower grades, and across the bottom you will see there are posters spread out across there, classroom posters that he was hoping to get, and he had a certain amount of funding for them, but to actually purchase them, he could not ship them. They had to be carried, and to pick them out became the challenge. Well, we had a volunteer who had asked several times, what can I do? What can I do? And finally, I had Jeff's parameters for the posters, and I had a few places where I knew they were sold, but going out online and finding those posters was just time consuming. So this person volunteered to do that, and she sent me a list of over 100 links to posters that Jeff could just click through really quick and pick out the ones he could afford, he sent them to us and we carried them over. Another thing that was just a wish list for him, he wanted to put a note of encouragement with a Bible verse in a textbook for every single student to discover early in the year. And we were able to do that. We spread the word, and volunteers stepped up, and we wrote the cards. And then when we got there, we got the classroom lists and put the first names on the top of each of the cards. So these are just 3 examples of literally how we have asked, how volunteers have stepped up and been the heroes to provide opportunities for really making a difference, teaching those who will learn their skill and then be a part of the team to go and share with other people. Sometimes you're just teaching people a sliver of what you really know how to do, and that's because that's really all they need on the team. Sharing those encouragement and knowledge experiences across the web. These are so exciting, people. I just can't tell you. Encouraging a young first-time job seeker who is a new believer in a third world country. That's exciting. Imagine answering a WhatsApp call from a pastor in an African village on a Sunday morning when you're about to go teach Sunday school and he just finished his sermon to his small village church. I mean, isn't that mind-blowing? And think about the opportunity to regularly Facebook message a young mother isolated from any other English-speaking moms almost monthly. They may see another mother that speaks English. Those are powerful opportunities. Of course, traveling to places where others need your superpowers is a life-changing opportunity for some of us. And then creating, purchasing, and producing things to send for a ministry across the world. These are all the works of heroes. However, I must share a little bit of a reality check, offer some warning label maybe along these lines. When you engage, you almost always have to release your own expectations. If you are really invested in this skill or this ability, or if you have a professional experience that you're sharing, almost always when it's channeled through the Spirit, it turns out differently on the other end. Sometimes we are partnered with the ingenious creativity of the nationals who have already overcome the obstacles you face when you're trying to ply your craft in a new world. Sometimes there are limited supplies, things you expected to be able to pick up easily, and there's not a resource for it. Many times local authorities get in our way and make things almost seemingly impossible, or the time gets away from us because of that. Time also gets away from us because of the pace of schedules. I don't know if you know this, but in a good majority of the world, the concept of schedule is a myth. They are just not in a hurry like we very, very often are. Another thing I feel I should warn you about is when you don't get to go on the team. When you don't use your passport to travel, sometimes it's hard when you don't go. The team comes back and they're excited, and you don't feel appreciated like the time and effort that you put into the preparation. And we're trying to do better at that. But it is a reality sometimes, and you have to overlook it and forgive. Sometimes when the team comes back, they're exhausted. That last flight can be tough, and they don't show, again, their gratitude the way you're excited to hear all about it, and they're not ready to share all about it yet. We are trying to do better at having debrief events so that both the teams that went and the teams that stay feel more connected when possible, and giving updates and more frequently. Also, I need to say a word of caution again about the electronic realities, especially over the internet when you are communicating with someone in a different culture. At the end of the slides, there is a place to download some of the resources that I talked about earlier. And then God will grow you. If you do this, sometimes it hurts. Sometimes you go and you're excited to minister, and the people that you're doing this for just have attitude, or they are not engaged, or they're distracted by other things in their lives, and or something gets dumped on you and you feel, I got to do all of this and I'm not equipped, and it's terrifying. So growing hurts, but if you're doing it together, it can be such a blessing, such a blessing.
Like, you just see God bigger. There's this bigger plan in place, and all those things. Not that they don't matter, but my perspective changed, and God got bigger to me.
Yeah, good.
It's going to be okay.
Yeah, he took care of that.
Yes, exactly.
Why? There's no reason, no answer that I have for that, other than the fact that I know I'm a very blessed person. And I don't want to take it for granted.
I think not just thinking it as bigger, but also more eternal. I mean, for me, it was like being in Palestine. It was like the huge history. I was like, we're ready for that. It was like, wow.
Yeah, but being in an old place,
Yeah.
God is
He's been there
2000 years
ago.
Yeah,
And now.
yeah. I think one of the things that it has done for me is to realize how God is ever present all the time. I go to sleep, but if I wake in the middle of the night, there may be a message from somebody that is on the other side of the world, and I want to read it right then. I want to know what happened in the morning class that I prayed for before I went to bed. Has made me my brain think bigger than just my schedule. That things are happening, and that to me is exciting.
Just maybe you didn't understand that we're really more alike than we ever think we were.
Yes.
Because you have that opportunity to travel to several different places, and we get all worried about how different we are. But in reality, most of the time, the only difference in us is our language.
That's right. That's right.
You can get over that with translators or smiles or whatever, but we all cry alike, we smile alike, we laugh alike, we go to the bathroom alike. I mean, you get just right down to it. We're human beings on the face of the earth, just happen, like Eddie's talking about, to live in a different spot, in a different culture. So there are some differences, but in all reality, we serve under the same God. All that's the same.
That's right.
Talk more.
That's right. That's right. Even in places that are extremely different cultures, we struggle when we go to Palestine because it's so complex and different. But as we listen, different perspectives, and hear different perspectives, we realize, oh, that's kind of like this in our world, and that's like this in our history, and that's like, and so we begin to connect those same difficulties, but same emotions too. On Tuesday evening, I closed with a description of Psalms 130 that I found on an old note from Mike. I read it to him, and he said he didn't write it. We think it was probably Eugene Peterson that wrote this, but it comes from the psalm that's on the video, Psalm 130. The waiting and watching, that is, hoping, is based on the conviction that God is actively involved in his creation and vigorously at work in redemption, in our redemption, in the redemption of creation. Hoping does not mean doing nothing. It is not fatalistic resignation. It means going about our tasks confident that God will provide the meaning and the conclusions to those tasks. Hope is not compelled to work away at keeping up appearances with a bogus spirituality. It is the opposite of desperate and panicky manipulations of scurrying and worrying. And hope is not dreaming. It is not spinning an illusion or fantasy to protect us from our boredom or our pain. It means a confident, alert expectation that God will do what he said he will do. It is imagination put in the harness of faith. It is a willingness to let God do it his way and in his time. It is the opposite of making plans that we demand that God put into effect, telling him both how and when to do it. That is not hoping in God, but bullying God. I pray to God, my life a prayer, and wait for what he'll say and do. My life's on the line before God. My soul waits, and in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord, waiting and watching till morning, waiting and watching till morning. Wait and watch for God.
As you see, the next session's in Tuesday in October. We will do our very best to come to you again in some kind of venue or format to let you know what's been happening with these times together. WordWalk is uniquely designed and very capable of helping you to see the craft that is in you and the connections around you. As Jesus said, you may want to launch out into the deep. Then again, you may simply want to throw your nets on the other side. He also tells us to bring out the God flavors and to help us to see the God colors in this life. Keep the magic and the mystery in your kingdom-focused life. Amen.